People say I'm the world's best chef. They say, Nadia, your cakes, they're amazing. How do you do it? I give the people what they want. I got this on Amazon. Oh hey, and welcome back. Today marks a pretty important day. 16 years ago today, The Office premiered for the very first time, and I think we can all agree it changed our lives for the best. To celebrate this important day, I figured, why not throw The Office a birthday party? Today I'm going to be recreating the vanilla cake that you see in season 5, episode 17, where Jim and Dwight forget about Kelly's birthday. They kind of throw a bunch of stuff together, and they get her a vanilla cake. Even though I'm pretty sure she asked for ice cream. I'm not going to make just any vanilla cake. I'm actually going to be following the recipe to make a white velvet cake, which I'm pretty excited about, with a buttercream icing. I've never made this recipe before, as per usual. So you guys are going to follow along with me, and as always, we're going to see how this goes. On that note, let's get cooking. To get started on the cake, I'm going to beat 1 cup of unsalted butter with 2 cups of sugar and 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. Now, be very, very careful with your butter measurements. 1 brick of butter does not equal 1 cup. Half a brick of butter equals 1 cup. The recipe that I'm following has very specific instructions. It suggests beating the butter, sugar, and vanilla for 10 minutes. So I'm gonna start my timer and I'm gonna follow those instructions to the T because I feel like that's just what you should do. While that's mixing, I'm going to prepare my dry ingredients. So in a separate bowl, I'm going to sift 3 1/4 cups of flour. I always sift my flour because I don't like when there's clumps in it. You might not think there are gonna be clumps in your flour, and then you sift it and boom, clumps. I'm also gonna add 3 1/2 teaspoons of baking powder and 1 teaspoon of salt. I'm just going to mix the dry ingredients to make sure everything's combined. And now I'm going to measure out exactly 2 1/2 cups of buttermilk. It's like kind of interesting because I realized that I would usually stop the mixer around the 5-minute mark just based on like how it looked. This is really nice and beat. It's almost like whipped. It's looking like, looks like a dream, to be honest. As always, I'm just gonna scrape everything off. Oh my God, it's like, it's just so light and airy. I love this. Oh, but I'm not supposed to, I'm supposed to add the eggs. Whoops. Honestly, my mom's at the grocery store, otherwise this probably would not have happened because she would have been like, don't forget the eggs. And I would have been like, oh yeah, I got it. I would have played it off like, yeah, I was gonna add them anyway. I had no idea I was supposed to add them, I totally forgot. Let this be a lesson to always read and reread your recipes. So I'm gonna put this back on the mixer and I'm gonna add my egg whites. So I'm gonna separate 6 egg whites. These eggs are just at room temperature. I've learned that it's easier to separate eggs when they're cold, but you usually use room temperature eggs in recipes, so just gotta choose your battles. I always like to crack my eggs in a separate bowl before adding it to my mixture. This just makes it easier to resolve any issues like eggshells, or if you have really large eggs, sometimes you can get 2 yolks in them. So just making sure all your measurements are correct and you avoid a lot of problems this way. Also, if you get a rotten egg, like no, then you don't ruin the batch, do it separate. So I'm gonna add these egg whites in 1 at a time, beating for about 10 seconds in between just to make sure everything's combined. So I literally accidentally cracked the entire egg in here, so I'm gonna use the eggshell. The eggshell is gonna help you really quickly and easily get everything out. See, there we go. It's a lot easier than using a spoon. You can just take the whole yolk out. And there we go. Anyway, back to our program. So before I add this last egg white, I'm just gonna stop and scrape the sides. So everything looks really nice and combined. So now that everything is combined and I've scraped down the sides, I'm going to alternate adding the dry ingredients and the buttermilk. Probably gonna go maybe 1/3 at a time. And I'm gonna have the mixer on low speed because I don't want the flour to go everywhere. It's looking like a nice cake batter. It smells very buttermilky. I don't know if that's a word. It is now. I'm gonna be splitting this batter up into 2 different cake pans. Now, I've seen a lot of different methods in terms of preparing your cake pans. Some people oil them, spray them, flour them, use parchment paper. But I think today I'm gonna be using butter and flour in one and then parchment paper in the other, just to see if it makes a difference, if one's easier than the other, or if they're pretty much the same. To get started on the butter pan, I'm just gonna take probably about a little less than a tablespoon of butter and work it into the pan with a paper towel. You can use your hands, I just find it easier to use a paper towel. Please make sure to get all the edges and corners. Once again, those are the most important parts. And then I'm gonna sprinkle a little bit of flour on top and kind of hit the pan on the side with my palms just to get the flour moving around, make sure everything's covered evenly. And you don't want excess flour. Really tap it out on the side and get any excess flour on, because otherwise it'll stick to the cake. And to be honest, like I said, my mom is grocery shopping, so I don't really know what happens if you do have excess flour in there. I was just told to avoid it. And there you have it, a buttered and floured pan. As for the parchment paper pan, I saw this technique where if you kind of like wash your parchment paper, you like soak it in water, it makes it a lot easier to mold to the pan. So I figured, hey, why not try it? Yeah, so to be honest, that really didn't do anything. I much rather prefer putting oil or Pam on the bottom of the pan, and then that way the parchment paper really sticks. Oh yeah, that's much better. You could use a scale to separate your batter, but I'm just gonna eyeball it and do about half in each. So those are looking pretty good. I'm gonna pop them in the oven at 350 Fahrenheit for about 25 to 30 minutes. While the cakes are baking, I'm gonna get started on the buttercream icing. So I have all my ingredients here. I'm going to be doubling the recipe, so that's how I'll be explaining it to you guys. To get started on the buttercream icing, I'm going to add 4 cups of butter into the mixer, or if you remember our math from earlier, that would be about 2 bricks. That's gonna whisk for about 1 minute, and then on a lower speed, I'm going to add the icing sugar and the salt and keep on whisking until combined. And then I'm gonna bring it up to a higher speed and add the vanilla and milk. The buttercream looks really good. It's nice and fluffy. So I have my cake board and I'm gonna transfer my cakes onto here. I think I'm gonna start off with the one that we use the parchment paper for. I mean, that came off super smoothly. And then before I put any icing in between, I'm gonna take out my second layer. This is the one that we use the butter and flour. Technical difficulties. Okay, sorry. Okay, so it came out not as easily. With a clean ruler and a sharp knife, I'm just gonna make a straight cut down the edge so the layers are the same size. To assemble the cake, I'm gonna start off by putting a few scoops of ice cream on the cake and then smoothing it out. This is the time to really level out your cake. If you found that one side rose more than the other, you can kind of use the icing in your favor to make sure it's all even. I'm also gonna kind of spill it over on the side so I can start icing the outside of the cake. And then once I'm satisfied with how smooth and level it is, I'm gonna add the second layer of cake and do the exact same thing. I'm gonna call this my crumb coat, although this cake doesn't really crumb as you ice it, which is really nice. So I'm just gonna do a thin layer of icing all on the outside. Try and make it as smooth as possible, filling in any gaps. Icing is kind of like glue. You can really use it in your favor to help shape your cake, fill in any gaps that you don't like. It's happened to me a lot of the times where a cake layer will break as I'm transferring it. And you just use some icing, you glue it back together, and it's all good. When I finish this crumb coat, I'm gonna let the cake sit in the freezer for a few minutes just to really harden and solidify, and then I'm gonna go back in with another thin layer of icing and finish it off and make it super smooth. While that's chilling, I'm gonna make my stencil. So I found an image online that I wanted to use and traced it onto some parchment paper. Then with a sponge and a toothpick, I poked holes along the lines. When it's done, I'm gonna place the parchment paper on the cake and re-poke the holes, and that's how the design's gonna transfer. The cake was in the freezer, so it could really kind of solidify. It's butter, so it's gonna harden up pretty quickly. I'm gonna add a few more scoops of icing just to add another clean layer on the outside. I'm gonna make sure it's nice and smooth. You can leave it looking a little bit rough, or if you wanna make it nice and smooth, you can just run your spatula under some hot water and smooth it out that way. The cake is done. I ran into a lot of roadblocks along the way. The stencil didn't end up working out as nicely as I thought it would. I can't read that. How do I... Oh god, this didn't work out like I thought it was gonna work out. So I had to smooth the cake over and then go back to the stencil, poke some more holes in it, re-poke the holes in the cake, and then I iced it. And I mean, it's not looking too bad. It's I mean, it's a cake. It'll taste good. I mean, I'm sure it's gonna be fine. This just goes to show you that just because you plan everything out perfectly doesn't mean it's always gonna turn out perfectly. I really thought this all through. I thought the stencil was gonna be great. The icing was nice and stiff. It was gonna be just the best. And it didn't really work out the first time around. But that's okay, nothing was ruined in the process. Like I said, I was just able to smooth it over again, kind of backtrack a little bit. And I learned something for the next time. The more holes you poke in your stencil, the easier it will be to transfer it onto your cake. And maybe one day I'll get so good that I don't even need a stencil, but for now, we're just gonna stick with the stencil. I specifically am very proud of this border. Usually whenever we make cakes in my family, I always let my mom do the border because she just whips it out, masters it. But I did it myself. I think this is called like a seashell border. And it turned out pretty good. I mean, I'm not like too disappointed by it. It's something again that I'm definitely gonna have to perfect over the years, and it'll only get better with practice. But for the first time, I must say, I'm proud of myself. I think Angela and her parting planning committee would be, well, maybe not Angela would be proud, but I think everybody else would like the cake, and I think it's gonna taste really good. So on that note, we get to cut into it and give it a taste. Oh my God, it's dense. So you can see the cake baked all the way through. There's a really good layer of buttercream in the middle. I don't think there's too much icing. I think it's gonna taste good. All right, I'm really excited to try this. It's moist, it's not dry. I like this cake. It's not too vanilla-y, which is kind of nice because sometimes if you add too much vanilla extract, you get kind of like a hit of vanilla. I think buttercream is my new favorite icing. This is really good. That's all for me this week. I had lots of fun making this, and I hope I did the office proud. If you watch the show, let me know what your favorite episode is in the comments below. And while you're there, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you next Friday. Now that I kind of like had that piece of cake, it is a little bit sweet. I think the next time I would put less sugar in the cake because the icing is hitting now. It is like a little bit sweet, but it's still really good. I would still recommend. I confused myself now. I always like to crack my bowls in a crack my bowls. Oof, that's heavy. This makes me happy. And yeah, I get cooking now. I don't really know what I'm gonna say. I wonder if I could like. Oh my God, so heavy. When things started going south, I was really tempted to just throw a chiclet on like they did in the episode and be like, you can choose your theme. Do you want 30 minutes of napping time or 30 minutes of TV time? And then I was just gonna go take a nap because I was really over things. I don't even know where they went. Oh, there's Cheetos all over me.